I remember one day back in 1987, my parents dropped me off at a card store to hang out for about a half an hour while they ran some errands. And while I was there was this set. It was called Don Russ Opening Day. So it had that 1987 Don Russ baseball design, but instead of it being black around the border, it was like a dark red or a maroon or like a reddish brown type color. And it was something like 18 or 20 bucks or maybe 25 bucks. And I had some money. I was mowing lawns and I was umpiring some Little League baseball. So I had some money at that point and decided to buy this set. 87 had some pretty cool rookies in it. Canseco was in there, McGuire, Bo Jackson, Barry Bonds. So I get it and I get home. I wait to open it until I get home. And I take the plastic covering off. It was laid out almost like a tray. It wasn't like a normal box where it was covered. You actually see some of the cards on the front of it. And it was like 4 or 5 wide, and each one had a stack. Anyway, I open it, I pull it out, I start looking through the cards, and they're pretty cool. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I'm glad that I have it. And I come to the Barry Bonds card, except I'm like, what a bunch of idiots. This isn't Barry Bonds. This is Johnny Ray. Johnny Ray, I think, was the second baseman for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I remember the name because Johnny Ray was just one of those guys who was just, good to have around. Perfectly competent player. I think he gave the Cardinals fits. And I showed the card to my friends. I'm like, look at this. I'm like, oh, that's not Bonds. That's Johnny Ray. That's funny. And I wouldn't say we were cracking up over it, but we laughed about it. And we would talk about it from time to time about how Don Russ messed up. And then like a year or two later, when Fleer put out the F-face card of Billy Ripken, we talk about different error cards, and we would talk about Johnny Ray being on the Barry Bonds card. Let's jump forward now about 33 years. I've gone home to St. Louis during the pandemic to visit my dad and to bring all my old childhood sports cards back because I had heard that they were going up in value and it was time to sell them and I could get some grocery money for the family or who knows what else. I brought back, 60, 70,000 cards. And one of the things I brought back was the Don Russ opening day set. And it was, I kept my cards very neat as a kid. Very, very labeled. I had top loaders as a kid, all sorts of things. And I had the set still in peerless condition. And as I was getting ready to list it on eBay, as I was listing all sorts of other things, I saw it again. And I was like, oh, I remember this card. This isn't Barry Bonds. This is Johnny Ray. Whatever. And I listed the cards. I listed the set, I think, for about 18 bucks, 20 bucks. And wouldn't you know, that thing sold. That thing sold so fast. And I thought, this is hilarious. This is a nothing little set that over the course of 3 decades, I didn't make any money. I didn't lose any money. I just sold it for what I bought it for. And I guess that's the story of sports cards, right? They don't go up in value. Well, I decided not to sell all my sports cards, and I kind of got back into the hobby. And now here I am 5 years later, still a part of the hobby. But over those 5 years, I learned something that kind of eats me a little bit. As it turns out, that Barry Bonds Johnny Ray error card is a little bit rare. And it's sought after because not only is it a Barry Bonds rookie card, but I said that wrong. I'm just going to keep going, though. Not only is it a Barry Bonds card, it is a Barry Bonds rookie card, and it's a Barry Bonds error rookie card. Let me tell you now, the last few sales of that card, according to Card Ladder. There's one that's raw, that was bent up, and it's got creases everywhere, that sold for $200. Before that, one sold for $950, a PSA 6. Before that, a PSA 9 sold for $2,000. Remember, mine was in perfect mint condition. Before that, one went for $1,400 as an SGC 8. Another rare one with kind of beat up corners for $450. an SGC 7.5 for $1,200, and another PSA 9 for $1,850. Now remember, remember, I sold it for about $18 as part of the whole set on eBay. Why am I telling you this story? Because last week we wrapped up the limited series called Failing Up, in which we talked to collectors about the mistakes they've made, right? And how we can learn from them and how everybody makes them. And I have so much admiration for the 18 people who told their stories and were not ashamed of it. We're not embarrassed by it. They were just talking about mistakes because we've all made them. And so I wanted to share one with you to start off this episode as well. The likely $1,500 to $2,000 Barry Bonds card that I sold as part of a set for $18 because I didn't bother to do any research before I sold the card. And here's one more. Around, I don't know, maybe it was 2011, 2012, I thought about getting back into the hobby. And the card that piqued my interest was the 1953 Topps Satchel Paige. Beautiful card. And I'd been on eBay for about 10 years at that point, but never really looked at sports cards a whole lot. And decided to have a look. And sure enough, there they were. And they were not that expensive. They were going for $50, $60, maybe a nice one for $150. That would have been way out of my range. And I thought, you know what? We've got some young kids. We have other things to spend money on. It would be irresponsible of me to get back into cards and start buying vintage baseball cards right now. I don't think I need to tell you. If I had decided just to pull the trigger and started buying some vintage baseball cards 13, 14, 15 years ago, where I might be differently in the hobby right now, if I just trusted my gut, just sort of played a little bit. I am notorious when I'm not dealing with sports cards with my family for being being frugal, for not wanting to buy a new sweatshirt, for just continuing to wear my sweatpants even if they have a hole in it. And this is sort of what happened then. I wouldn't just treat myself to a $50 Satchel Paige 53 Topps card. Another mistake. So what I'm going to do today is we're going to hear my 18 takeaways from the 18 episodes, because I think it's worth going back one more time instead of just moving on so quickly and hearing the stories and the lessons that the 18 collectors I spoke with shared with us. This is The Shallow End. I appreciate you listening. Let's get started. As I record this less than a week ago, we finished the 18-part series called Failing Up, in which I got the chance to talk to 18 different collectors about mistakes they've made along the way that they've learned from. And they shared their mistakes in the hopes that we could all relate, feel better about ourselves, and maybe learn something from each other. And as I've done with my previous 2 limited series, before I get on and leave that in the past, I like to go through and have takeaways from the series. And so since there were 18 episodes, I've got today 18 takeaways from Failing Up. And these are not the takeaways that I hope you burn into your brain and apply to your own collecting journey, but rather, these are just what I take away from it. So take this for what you will, but this is what I take away from having these amazing conversations with 18 amazing different collectors. So I'm just going to go in the order in which the series appeared. So let's go ahead and do that now. Episode 1 was Andrew at St. Croix Cards. And his episode was about how when he got back into the hobby, found a couple of his old Tom Brady rookies and sold them way too cheap before he understood how much they were actually worth. He got his old box of cards out and just kind of sold them on eBay. and could have sold them for a lot more. And my takeaway from this is that sometimes enthusiasm and excitement gets the best of us, and that's normal. We can't always be ready, aim, fire. We're human, and sometimes we go fire, ready, aim. Episode 2 was Theo at Clemente Collector. Check out his YouTube page if you don't already. Now, he found something unique to Clemente at a flea market or a card show, and he ended up moving one of the cards his dad gave to him for it. It was an old Willie Mays, and of course, he can't get the card back now. My takeaway is you could just hear him imploring people to not make his same mistake. Like, this clearly affected him. So my takeaway is that the value of some cards transcends money. And Theo said, if you don't want to move a card, just leave it at home. Just leave it at home. And that's really good advice. Episode 3, Andrew at Fair Star Cards. Poor Andrew. He bought a fake auto. It happens. I've bought a fake card before. Lots of us have. My mistake, or rather my takeaway, is that I mistakenly thought it happened like right when he got back into collecting, but it was actually a couple of years in. He had to correct me. He goes, no, this was a couple of years into my collecting. So I guess the lesson there is we never stop learning. That's what mistakes are. And if we're not making mistakes, that means we're probably not learning anymore. Episode 4 was Dave Spinrad at Rated Rabbi. He talked through all the trials of new hobby lanes and figuring out which ones were for him and which ones were not. My takeaway was I asked him some question about not letting go of mistakes, and he said, we're so hard on ourselves. And just the way he said it, it told me he was talking about more than just sports cards. In the end, we're all human. Failure is inevitable and essential, and sometimes we just got to be a little bit kinder to ourselves and not keep beating ourselves up after we do make a mistake. And we all make mistakes. Episode 5 was Chad at Black Hat Cards. He kept trying and trying to get the right Tyreek Hill card. It took him, I think, like 4 tries to get it. And my takeaway with this one was just empathy. I've been there. I've talked so many times that I have a Juan Soto problem. I don't know how many cards I've gone through looking for just the right one, but I always end up trading it or selling it. I just keep trying. Maybe someday I'll get Juan Soto. Episode 6 was Dr. Jim Beckett. He was talking about how he grew too fast. Not so much his company, but as the company was starting to build, as Beckett Media was starting to grow, they decided to move to a larger building, but it was too big. And it ended up changing the perception of the company and to some degree, the culture of the company. So this was the title of the episode, but it bears repeating anyway. Bigger isn't always better. And although he was talking about the company, and that could also apply to our collecting. I'm learning this right now with a few Albert Pujols cards that I'm adding to my collection. Some of Pujols' best cards are neither rookies nor one-of-ones. They're just these 2-figure cards that look amazing and are hard to find. Bigger isn't always better. Episode 7 was Craig at New York City Sports Cards, and he sold some Steph Curry rookies too soon. After the first title, when there was a little spike after the Warriors' first title, before the real climb of Curry cards kicked in. Craig identified Curry very early and got cards cheap, a ton of Steph Curry rookie cards. But selling a bunch of them, even though they were on the way up at the wrong time, right? It taught Craig to look 5, 10, 20 years out and not take the first good thing that comes along. My takeaway was, if we only look 2 inches in front of our face, we don't know if we're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. If we only look 2 inches in front of our face, we can't see the whole picture. Take a deep breath and consider the long game. Episode 8 It's Robert at Robert M. Cards. He sold his entire collection at a card show at the beginning of the boom. Someone unexpectedly approached him at the show when he was set up and made the offer, and Robert very quickly thought about it and instinctively said yes. My takeaway with Robert is very similar to what my takeaway was with Theo at Clemente Collector. This reinforced that some cards' values transcend money. And it wasn't always the cards that Robert remembered. It was the memories that went with those cards. Who he got them with, where he was when he got them. He can't get those back. And you could just hear in his voice that still bothers him. Episode 9 was Jonathan at Sports Cards and Sunsets. He veered way out of his lane for a card that he didn't fully understand. It could have cost him dearly, but this story had a happy ending. My takeaway? Well, something Jonathan said stuck with me more than anything else in this 18-part series, so I'm going to leave that for the very end. Stay tuned. Episode 10 is Nick at Tasty Card Sandwich. Nick got back into collecting when some of the most sought-after cards in today's hobby were being made, but he never noticed because he was so incredibly focused on his own interests. He missed the best chance he'd ever have at cards that today are coveted by so many. My takeaway is I think Nick was being too hard on himself, like way too hard on himself. I totally got where he was coming from, and there's nothing wrong with being focused. I viewed his story more as something to strive for than avoid. Nick's focus is admirable. Episode 11 is Mark at MJS Sports Cards. When Mark got back into the hobby, he paid at the peak for graded base prism cards and realized very quickly he was losing a considerable amount of money. So he recalibrated. My takeaway from Mark is I realized sometimes you just really love this hobby. Some people fled the hobby quickly when they made similar mistakes. I'm even hesitant to use that word, but when they had similar experiences to Mark. But Mark took his lumps and he shifted his focus to what he really liked. That's when you know or hope that somebody is a hobby lifer. Episode 12 is Josh Adams at Midwest Vintage Cards and 90s Auctions. Nearly 2 decades ago, Josh made an investment play for 50 signed checks of Joe DiMaggio. That's 50 autos of the Yankee Clipper, figuring he could quickly turn that into profit. He was wrong, and now, in 2025, he still has some of those checks. One of my favorite moments of this series was when Josh described his moment of clarity and realized his mistake. He thought, wait a minute, if I just bought 50 signed DiMaggio checks without much competition for those checks, how many of these things are out there? I know I've been there. When after I've made a mistake, the flaw in my thinking becomes so obvious. Episode 13 was Jeff at My Favorite Cardboard and Blabbin' About Slabbin'. He shared a few mistakes, but the one that stuck with me was how he ruined his own Juan Soto card while prepping it for grading. He basically tore paper off the back. As he told the story, this is my takeaway. As he told the story, I had an actual brief physical reaction of feeling sick to my stomach. It was the same one I had when I once screwed up cracking out a card and ended up tearing a piece off the edge of it. If you've never damaged your own card, I hope you never feel what Jeff and I have felt. Episode 14 is Zan at Zanu 23 Sports Cards. Zan shared his story of realizing he was starting to display characteristics of addiction while opening boxes of cards. So he made himself stop and transitioned to singles and more thoughtful, deliberate, responsible buying. My takeaway, honestly, as he shared his story, my mind drifted back to Mark at MJS Sports Cards again, and how rather than cut and run, Zan stuck with the hobby. There's a level of willpower and determination and personality and self-actualization that allowed Zan to break free of boxes but still stay in the hobby. I'm not sure I have the words to really sum up that accomplishment, but it was meaningful to listen to. Episode 15 is John at Istanbul Cards and Global Card Collectors. He bought a one of the son of one of his favorite soccer players, but the son has struggled with success and injuries. And with the one not being from the most desirable of sets, John has kind of been stuck with the card now. I was really impressed by John's patience. That was my takeaway. He could have dumped the card at any point, at any moment in time, and just taken the big loss. But he's tracking the market and the soccer world, and he's waiting for the right time to sell and hopefully limit the amount of financial loss. It's that kind of patience that, it's not going to make up for the mistake, but it's going to limit it. And I really admired him for doing that. Episode 16 is Marty at Signed 1933 Gaudi. He couldn't pinpoint a failure that really ate at him. Instead, framing the discussion around the hobby being a long game. You win some, you lose some, and hopefully you learn. So my takeaway was just be patient with yourself. Not everything is going to be perfect. Not everything is going to go perfectly. And if you dwell on the past, you're going to drive yourself crazy. Episode 17, Matt Worley from the Slabnomics podcast and the Instagram handle of the same name. He talked about buying all sorts of things when he got back into the hobby before he even really knew what he liked and didn't like. My takeaway was how much I loved this story because it's so universal. It was so relatable. I remember nodding along as he was talking. Been there, done that. And a few DMs I got from listeners about this episode were similar. It was a lot of, oh yeah, I did that too. That was me. I think Matt referred to it as a rite of passage. And that is spot on. All right. And number 18 was Dave at Paper Street Sports Cards. Dave talked about getting back into the hobby, finding a type of card that he liked, and then ignoring his own instincts because so-called experts at an LCS and in the content space, they were championing buying and grading base cards. My takeaway is, I wish you could have seen this, but while we talked, Dave pulled from his collection a box he labeled Dave's Big Box of Mistakes, or something like that. I love that he kept them as reminders of what can go wrong when you prioritize the buying view of others over yourself. Okay, I said I would come back to Jonathan at Sports Cards and Sunsets. Toward the end of our chat, he said something that wasn't even entirely related to mistakes or failing, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was just 3 words. But for someone as impatient as I am, it was 3 words I badly needed not just to hear, but actually listen to. And I'm trying. I'm really trying. Jonathan said, collecting is slow. Yeah, man, I tell you what, collecting is slow. I'm just going to leave that there, and please do with it as you will. Collecting is slow. Thanks for checking out The Shallow End. I'll talk with you again soon, whenever that may be.